The blood on Clara Jenkins's torn dress had dried to a dark rust color by the time she stumbled into the clearing where Isaac Sullivan was mending fence posts under the late afternoon sun of the Montana Territory. He looked up from his work, hammer frozen mid-swing, as the young woman collapsed against the wooden rail he had just secured. Her auburn hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it, cascading in tangled waves across her face, and her green eyes held a wild desperation that made something tighten in his chest. "Help me," she gasped, her voice raw and breaking. "Please, I need somewhere to hide." Isaac dropped his tools immediately and caught her as her knees buckled. She could not have been more than 20 years old, he guessed, maybe a year or two younger than his own 24 years. Up close, he could see the bruising along her jaw, the split in her lower lip, and the way her hands trembled as she clutched at his shirt. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady despite the anger already building in his gut at whoever had done this to her. "I have got you. Can you walk a little further? My cabin is just beyond those trees." She nodded, though her breath came in short, panicked bursts. "They cannot find me," she whispered. I finally ran." "Nobody is going to hurt you here," Isaac promised, though he did not yet understand who she was running from or why. He wrapped an arm around her waist and helped her across the uneven ground, guiding her carefully around the roots and rocks that jutted from the earth. His cabin was modest, a sturdy structure he had built himself over the course of 2 summers. It sat in a small valley about 5 miles outside of Petaluma, Montana, far enough from town that he valued the solitude, but close enough that he could ride in for supplies when needed. The mountains rose up behind the property, their peaks still touched with snow even though it was June of 1882. Inside, the single room was clean and orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed sat against another, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied the center. Isaac helped the woman to one of the chairs and quickly poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Drink this," he said, pressing the cup into her shaking hands. "Slow sips." She obeyed, her eyes never leaving his face, as if trying to determine whether she had made a terrible mistake in trusting him. Isaac moved to the fireplace and stoked the embers there, adding kindling until small flames began to lick at the wood. The evening would turn cold soon enough, as mountain evenings always did. "My name is Isaac Sullivan," he said, keeping his movements slow and deliberate so as not to startle her. "This is my land and you are safe here. Can you tell me your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Jenkins." "Clara," he repeated, settling into the chair across from her. "Can you tell me who hurt you?" Her hands tightened around the cup until her knuckles went white. "My husband." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Isaac felt his jaw clench, but he kept his expression neutral. In his experience, scared women did not need anger directed anywhere near them, even if it was on their behalf. "How long have you been married?" he asked quietly. 3 months. Her voice broke on the words. 3 months of hell. "My father arranged it. Thomas Jackson is a wealthy man, owns half the cattle ranches between here and Miles City. My father owed him money, gambling debts that kept piling up, so he sold me to settle the account." Isaac had heard similar stories before. The Wild West was full of desperate men making terrible choices, and their daughters often paid the price. "Does Jackson know you ran?" "By now, yes." Clara set down the cup with a sharp click against the wooden table. "He went into town this morning for business. I waited until he was gone, packed what I could carry, and started walking. But the bag got too heavy and I had to leave it behind. I have been walking since dawn." That explained the state of her boots, which were caked with mud and showed splits along the seams. She must have walked nearly 15 miles through rough country. Isaac stood and moved to a trunk near his bed, pulling out a worn but clean shirt and a pair of trousers that would be far too large for her but better than the ruined dress. "Here," he said, handing them to her. "There is a screen in the corner. You can change behind it and I will turn my back besides. We need to burn that dress. If Jackson comes looking, I do not want evidence lying around." Clara took the clothes with a grateful nod and moved behind the wooden screen Isaac had positioned near the back corner. He busied himself at the stove, putting coffee on to boil and pulling out the remains of the venison he had cooked the night before. "I can never go back," Clara said from behind the screen, her voice muffled by fabric. "You need to understand that. Thomas said he would kill me if I ever tried to leave, and I believe him, Mr. Sullivan. I saw what he did to a ranch hand who stole from him. He broke both the man's arms and left him in the desert. Call me Isaac," he said, keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the stove. "And I heard you. You do not have to go back anywhere you do not want to be." She emerged from behind the screen looking almost childlike in his oversized clothes. She had rolled the sleeves and pant legs multiple times, and she clutched the waistband to keep the trousers from falling down. Despite everything, Isaac found himself thinking she looked beautiful, with her hair falling loose around her shoulders and her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." Isaac poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. "I have lived in Montana Territory for 6 years now. Came out here after my parents died of fever back in Ohio. In that time, I have learned to read people pretty well, and you, Clara Jenkins, are not a liar. You are just someone who got dealt a bad hand and is trying to survive it." She accepted the coffee with trembling fingers. "He will come looking. Thomas has men who work for him, rough men who know how to track. If they find me here, they will hurt you too." "Let me worry about that," Isaac said, though he was already running through possibilities in his mind. His cabin was remote but not impossible to find. If Jackson's men started asking questions in Petaluma, someone might remember seeing Clara heading in this direction. "For tonight, you need rest. I will sleep on the floor. You can have the bed." "I cannot take your bed," Clara protested. "You can and you will," Isaac said firmly. "No arguments. Tomorrow we will figure out a plan, but tonight you need to sleep without worrying about anything." The coffee and food seemed to restore some of Clara's strength. As night settled fully over the valley, Isaac spread blankets near the fireplace while Clara settled onto his bed, still wearing his 2 large clothes. He could hear her breathing gradually slow and deepen, though every so often a small sound would escape her, like even in sleep she could not fully relax. Isaac lay awake for a long time, staring at the shadows the fire cast across the ceiling beams. He had not lied when he said he had learned to read people. Clara Jenkins was genuine in her fear, genuine in her desperation. And something about her had struck a chord deep in his chest, something he had not felt since he left Ohio. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Isaac woke to find Clara already up, standing at the window and looking out at the mountains. She had attempted to braid her long hair, though strands still escaped to frame her face. "Morning," he said, pushing himself up from the floor and rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. "I am sorry," Clara said without turning around. "You should not have to sleep on your own floor." "Stop apologizing," Isaac said, moving to the stove to restart the fire. "You have nothing to be sorry for." He made breakfast from cornmeal and the last of his eggs, and they ate in companionable silence. In the daylight, Isaac could see the full extent of the bruising on Clara's face. The marks were several days old, fading from purple to greenish yellow. His hands tightened on his fork. "How often did he hit you?" The question came out harder than he intended. Clara set down her fork carefully. "Often enough. Usually where it would not show. He prided himself on his reputation in town, so he did not want people talking. But sometimes he lost control." "No man who raises his hand to a woman has any control to lose," Isaac said flatly. "That is just cruelty, plain and simple." They spent the morning discussing options. Clara could not stay hidden in the cabin forever. Eventually supplies would run low or someone would notice Isaac making unusual purchases in town. She needed a more permanent solution. "I could take you to Miles City," Isaac suggested. "It is a bigger town, easier to disappear in. You could find work, maybe as a seamstress or a cook." Clara shook her head. "Thomas has business connections there. Someone would recognize me eventually, and besides, I have no money for the train fare to go anywhere else." "What about family? Anyone who would take you in?" "My mother died when I was 12. My father made it clear when he married me off that I was no longer his concern. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but I have not seen her since I was a child. I do not even know if she still lives there." Isaac leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Then we make a different plan. You stay here, at least for a while. I can say you are my cousin if anyone asks, came west to help with the property. In a few months, when things have died down, we can arrange passage for you somewhere far enough away that Jackson will never find you." "You would do that?" Clara's eyes widened. "Keep lying for me, risk everything for a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," Isaac said simply. "You are someone who needs help, and I have the means to give it. That is all there is to it." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Isaac taught Clara how to handle the basic tasks around the property, while he worked on mending fences and tending to his small herd of cattle. She proved to be a quick learner, mastering the art of drawing water from the well, feeding the chickens Isaac kept in a coop behind the cabin, and even helping him repair a section of the barn roof that had been damaged in a spring storm. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Clara told him about growing up in Petaluma, about the mother she had lost too young, and the father who had never recovered from that loss, drowning his grief in cards and whiskey until the debts became insurmountable. Isaac shared stories of his childhood in Ohio, of working on his father's small farm and dreaming of wide open spaces. "I used to imagine the West as this place of complete freedom," he said one night, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "No rules, no expectations, just a man and his land and endless possibility." "And is it?" Clara asked, curled in the chair across from him with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Isaac considered the question. "Yes and no. There is freedom here, more than I ever had back east. But there are still rules, just different ones. And there is still cruelty, still violence, just in new forms." "Like men who think they can buy wives," Clara said quietly. "Like that, yes." 10 days after Clara's arrival, Isaac rode into Petaluma for supplies. He had been putting off the trip, nervous about what he might hear in town, but they were running low on flour and coffee, and he needed ammunition for his rifle. The general store was busy when he arrived, filled with ranchers and their wives stocking up for the week ahead. Isaac kept his head down as he gathered what he needed, but he could not help overhearing the conversations around him. "Jackson has his men searching every homestead within 20 miles, one man was saying to another near the feed sacks, offering a reward for information about his missing wife. "Heard she ran off with a lover," the other man replied. "That is what Jackson is saying anyway." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm as he approached the counter with his purchases. The store owner, a grizzled man named Henry Price, who had been in Petaluma since before it had a proper name, tallied up the cost. "Hear anything about Thomas Jackson's wife?" Henry asked casually as he wrapped the flower in brown paper. "Should I have?" Isaac replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Word is she disappeared about 2 weeks ago. Jackson is tearing up the countryside looking for her. Seems mighty upset about it. Cannot imagine why a woman would run from such a devoted husband," Isaac said dryly, counting out coins. Henry's eyes sharpened, but he did not pursue the topic. "You need anything else, Sullivan? This will do for now. I appreciate it, Henry." The ride back to the cabin seemed longer than usual, Isaac's mind turning over what he had heard. Jackson was spreading lies about Clara, trying to paint her as unfaithful rather than admit she had fled his abuse. It was a smart strategy, Isaac had to admit. If people believed Clara had run off with a lover, they would be less sympathetic to her plight. When he reached the cabin, he found Clara in the garden plot behind the house, on her hands and knees pulling weeds. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and there was dirt smudged across her cheek. She looked up as he dismounted, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What did you hear?" she asked, standing and brushing dirt from the trousers she had permanently claimed as her own. Inside, over fresh coffee, Isaac relayed the conversation at the store. Clara listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. "He is telling people I was unfaithful," she said when Isaac finished. "Of course he is. Thomas would never admit that his wife had reason to leave. Better to paint me as a whore than acknowledge what he did." "Let him say what he wants," Isaac said. "The people who matter will know the truth." "Will they?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Thomas Jackson is rich and respected. I am nobody. Who do you think people will believe?" Isaac reached across the table and took her hand before he could think better of it. Her fingers were cool and slim in his calloused palm. "I believe you," he said firmly, "and I will keep believing you no matter what Jackson says." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" The question hung between them, and Isaac realized he did not have a simple answer. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Clara had stopped being just a woman in need of help. She had become someone he looked forward to talking with each evening, someone whose laugh made his chest feel warm, someone whose safety mattered to him more than his own. "Because you deserve someone on your side," he said finally. "Because you are brave and strong and you should not have to face this alone." A tear spilled down Clara's cheek, and she turned her hand in his so their palms pressed together. "Isaac, I need to tell you something. I am falling in love with you." The words should have scared him. They should have made him pull back, remind her that she was married, that this was complicated, that they barely knew each other. Instead, Isaac felt something settle into place in his chest, like a key turning in a lock. "I am falling in love with you too," he said, and watched her eyes widen. "I think I have been since you collapsed at my fence line. And I know the timing is terrible and the situation is impossible, but that does not make it any less true." Clara stood from her chair and moved around the table. Isaac rose to meet her, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. "We will figure this out," he promised. "Somehow we will make this right." That night, they talked for hours about the future. Clara's marriage to Jackson was legal, performed by a proper minister with witnesses and documents. In the eyes of the law, she was his property, and running away could be considered theft. The ugly truth of it made Isaac's blood boil, but anger would not solve their problem. "There has to be a way," Clara said, pacing in front of the fire. "A divorce, an annulment, something." "Divorce is nearly impossible to obtain," Isaac said. "You would need to prove adultery or abandonment, and Jackson could use your running away as evidence of your own adultery, especially with the stories he is spreading. An annulment would require proving the marriage was never valid to begin with. What if I could prove he forced me? Clara stopped pacing and turned to face him. What if there were witnesses to his violence? Even if there were, most judges would not care, Isaac said reluctantly. The law sees a man's treatment of his wife as his own business. It is not right, but it is reality. Clara sank back into her chair, defeat written across her features. So I am trapped. Either I stay hidden here forever, or I go back to him, or I run so far that you would never be able to find me again. Isaac moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. Or we fight, he said. We find a lawyer who will listen, we gather evidence, we make enough noise that someone has to pay attention. It will not be easy and it might not work, but at least we would be trying. Thomas has money for lawyers, Clara said. We have nothing. We have the truth, Isaac countered, and we have each other. That has to count for something. The following weeks were tense. Jackson's men continued to search the area, and twice Isaac spotted riders in the distance, close enough that he hurried Clara inside and made sure she stayed away from the windows. Each time, the riders moved on without approaching the cabin, but the near misses left them both shaken. To maintain the fiction that Clara was his cousin, Isaac began taking her into Petaluma with him on supply runs. It was risky, but he reasoned that hiding her completely would only fuel suspicion if anyone did start asking questions. He introduced her as Clara Sullivan, recently arrived from Ohio to help him manage the property. Clara proved to be a talented actress. She kept her hair pinned up under a bonnet, wore dresses Isaac purchased in town, and spoke to the shopkeepers with easy confidence. If anyone recognized her as Thomas Jackson's missing wife, they gave no sign. On one such trip, they encountered Jackson himself. Isaac and Clara were loading supplies into the wagon outside the general store when a group of men on horseback rode up. Thomas Jackson sat at the center on a fine black stallion, his expensive suit and silver banded hat marking him as a man of wealth. He was handsome in a cold sort of way, with sharp features and pale blue eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. Clara froze, her hand clutching the sack of flour she had been about to lift into the wagon. Isaac stepped smoothly between her and the riders, blocking Jackson's view. "Help you gentlemen with something?" Isaac asked, his voice calm but his body tense. Jackson's gaze flicked over him dismissively. "Just watering our horses. Been riding all morning searching for my missing wife. You have not seen a young woman, auburn hair, green eyes, traveling alone, have you?" "Cannot say that I have," Isaac replied. "Though I have not been looking either. Been too busy working my own land." One of Jackson's men, a rough-looking character with a scar across his jaw, squinted past Isaac at Clara. "Who is that?" "My cousin Catherine," Isaac said without hesitation. "Came out from Ohio last month to help with the property." Jackson finally looked directly at Clara, who had turned to face them despite the fear Isaac could see in the set of her shoulders. She met Jackson's eyes steadily, and Isaac saw recognition flash across the man's face, followed immediately by confusion. Clara looked different enough from her wedding day, her hair styled differently and her clothes plain and practical, that Jackson could not quite place her. "Madam," Jackson said with a tip of his hat, still studying her face. "Sir," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor Isaac knew she must be feeling. The moment stretched out, taut as a bowstring. Then one of the other riders called out something about needing to check the next valley, and Jackson turned his horse away. "Good luck finding your wife," Isaac called after them, unable to resist. Jackson looked back over his shoulder. "Oh, I will find her," he said, his voice carrying a promise of violence. "And when I do, she will wish she had never run." They watched the riders disappear down the main street before either of them moved. Clara sagged against the wagon, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "He looked right at me," she whispered. "He looked right at me and did not know for certain." "The different hair helped," Isaac said, though his own heart was pounding. "And he is not expecting you to be standing in broad daylight on the main street pretending to be someone else. His mind could not make the pieces fit." "But he suspected," Clara said. "You saw it in his face." Isaac nodded grimly. "We need to be more careful, maybe no more trips to town together." That night, lying on his blankets by the fire while Clara slept in the bed, Isaac made a decision. They could not keep living like this, always looking over their shoulders, always one chance encounter away from disaster. He needed to find a more permanent solution, even if it meant taking a risk. The next morning, he rode to Miles City alone, telling Clara he would be back before nightfall. The larger town had a lawyer, a man named Robert Finch who had earned a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Isaac found his office above the bank, a cramped room filled with law books and papers. Finch was a small man with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. He listened without interruption as Isaac laid out the situation, leaving out only the detail of where Clara was currently hiding. "You are asking me to help a married woman obtain a divorce from a wealthy, powerful man based on accusations of abuse," Finch said when Isaac finished. "Do you understand how difficult that will be?" "I understand it is the right thing to do," Isaac replied. "The right thing and the legal thing are not always the same," Finch said. He leaned back in his chair, considering. "However, I have never liked Thomas Jackson. The man is a bully who uses his money to avoid consequences. If your cousin is willing to testify and if we can find other witnesses to corroborate the abuse, we might have a case." "What would it cost?" Isaac asked. Finch named a figure that made Isaac's stomach drop. It was more than he made in 6 months, more than he had saved even with his careful management. "I do not have that kind of money," Isaac admitted. "Then sell me a portion of your land," Finch suggested. "I have been looking for property in Montana Territory. Sign over, say, a quarter of your acreage and we will call it even." It was Isaac's turn to consider. The land was all he had, the culmination of 6 years of hard work, but Clara's freedom was worth more than any piece of earth. "Done," he said, extending his hand. They shook on it and Finch began drawing up the necessary papers. "Bring your cousin to meet with me next week," he said. "I will need to hear her story directly and prepare our case. And Sullivan, be prepared for this to get ugly. Jackson will not go quietly." Isaac rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting, his mind full of plans and worries. He found Clara standing outside, watching the mountains turn gold in the fading light. When she saw him, she ran to meet him, throwing her arms around him as he dismounted. "I was worried," she said against his chest. "You were gone so long." "I found us a lawyer," Isaac said, and felt her go still. "A good one. He thinks we have a case for divorce." Clara pulled back to look up at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. "Truly, truly." "But Clara, I need to ask you something important." Isaac took her hands, holding them gently. "Are you ready to fight? Really fight? Because once we start this, there is no going back. Jackson will do everything in his power to destroy you, to destroy both of us. It will be hard and ugly, and there is no guarantee we will win." Clara's jaw set with determination. "I am ready. I have been ready since the first time he hit me, and I realized this was my life now. If there is even a chance of freedom, I will take it." "Then we fight," Isaac said, and kissed her forehead gently. Together. The meeting with Finch the following week went better than Isaac had hoped. Clara told her story with a quiet strength that impressed both men, detailing not just the physical abuse but the emotional cruelty, the isolation, the constant fear. Finch took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Did anyone else witness the abuse?" he asked. "The household staff," Clara said. "Thomas kept a cook and 2 maids. They saw the bruises, heard the shouting, but they were terrified of him. I do not know if they would testify." "We will cross that bridge when we come to it," Finch said. "For now, I will begin drafting the petition for divorce. It will take some time to work through the courts, and Jackson will certainly contest it. You should prepare yourselves for a long battle." As summer deepened into July, Isaac and Clara settled into their new reality. During the day, they worked the land together, and Isaac taught Clara how to ride a horse properly, how to shoot a rifle in case she ever needed to defend herself, how to read the weather by watching the clouds gather over the mountain peaks. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch Isaac had built, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and understanding that went deeper than physical attraction. "Tell me about Ohio," Clara said one night, her head resting on Isaac's shoulder. "It was green," Isaac said, his arm around her waist. "So green compared to here. Trees everywhere, close together, not like these wide open spaces. I loved my parents' farm, but it always felt small to me, like the world was bigger than what I could see between the fence lines." "And now?" Clara asked. "Now I have more space than I know what to do with," Isaac said with a smile. "Funny how that works, but I would not trade it. This land, this life, it feels right, especially now that you are here." Clara turned to look up at him, and in the starlight her eyes were luminous. "Isaac, I know this started as you helping someone in need, but it has become more than that for me, so much more." "For me too," Isaac said softly. "Clara, I know we cannot marry, not while you are still legally Jackson's wife, but in my heart you are already mine, and I am yours for as long as you will have me." "Forever," Clara whispered. "I want forever." They kissed then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and promises. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Stay with me tonight," Isaac said. "Really with me. No more sleeping on the floor pretending we are just friends." Clara nodded, taking his hand. "Yes, I want that, I want you." They moved inside together, and that night they became lovers in truth, coming together with a tenderness that made Clara cry and Isaac's heart feel too big for his chest. Afterward, they lay tangled in the narrow bed, Clara's head on Isaac's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never knew it could be like this," Clara said quietly. "Gentle, caring. Thomas was always so rough, like he was trying to hurt me even in our marriage bed." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "That was not love. What he did to you was not anything close to love." "I know that now," Clara said. "Because now I know what real love feels like." August brought news from Finch. The divorce petition had been filed, and Jackson had indeed contested it vigorously. His lawyers were painting Clara as a hysterical woman who had abandoned her marital duties, and they were demanding she return to her husband immediately. Finch had countered with a request for testimony from Clara about the abuse, but the judge was hesitant. "The problem is precedent," Finch explained when Isaac and Clara met with him again. "There are very few cases in Montana territory of a woman being granted divorce on grounds of cruelty. The judges do not want to set a precedent that might encourage other women to leave their husbands. So they would rather keep women trapped in violent marriages," Clara said, her voice sharp with anger. "That is the reality of our legal system," Finch said. "However, I am not giving up. I have sent requests to the household staff asking them to provide statements. If even one of them is willing to corroborate your account, It will strengthen our case considerably." 2 weeks later, they received their answer. The cook, an older woman named Martha, had provided a written statement detailing multiple instances of witnessing Jackson's violence toward Clara. She had signed it and had it notarized, despite knowing it might cost her employment. "Why would she do that?" Clara asked, staring at the document in wonder. "She could lose everything." "Some people still believe in doing the right thing," Finch said with satisfaction. "And this changes everything. With a third-party witness, we have a much stronger case. I am going to push for a hearing date as soon as possible." The hearing was set for early September in the courthouse in Miles City. Isaac and Clara spent the intervening weeks preparing, with Finch coaching Clara on what to expect during testimony. Jackson's lawyers would try to discredit her, to paint her as unreliable and dishonest. She needed to stay calm, stick to the facts, and not let them rattle her. "He will be there," Finch warned. "Jackson will be sitting in that courtroom watching you testify. Can you handle that?" Clara's hand found Isaac's under the table. "With Isaac beside me, I can handle anything." The day of the hearing dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. Isaac and Clara rode into Miles City together in the wagon, with Finch meeting them at the courthouse steps. "Remember," Finch said as they walked inside, "tell the truth, stay calm, and do not let Jackson's lawyers provoke you into anger. The judge needs to see you as credible and sympathetic." The courtroom was smaller than Clara had imagined, with wooden benches for observers and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Thomas Jackson was already there with his 2 lawyers, both well-dressed men with expensive leather satchels. Jackson's eyes locked on Clara the moment she entered, and the naked fury in them made her step closer to Isaac. "You are safe," Isaac murmured. "I am right here." The judge, a stern-looking man named Albert Morrison, called the hearing to order. He had a reputation for fairness, Finch had told them, which was the best they could hope for given the circumstances. Finch presented their case first, outlining the history of abuse and Clara's flight from the marriage. Then he called Clara to the stand. She walked on trembling legs to the witness chair and swore to tell the truth. For the next hour, Clara recounted her marriage to Jackson. She described the first time he hit her, just 2 days after their wedding, when she had asked if she could write to her aunt in San Francisco. She detailed the escalating violence, the isolation, the constant fear. She showed the faint scars on her arms where he had burned her with a cigar as punishment for letting dinner grow cold. Jackson's lawyers objected frequently, trying to paint her testimony as exaggerated or fabricated. But Clara remained steady, her voice never wavering, her eyes never leaving the judge's face. When Jackson's lawyers cross-examined her, they tried every tactic Finch had warned about. They suggested she had been unfaithful, that she had provoked the violence, that she was lying to gain sympathy and avoid her wifely duties. "Is it not true, Mrs. Jackson, that you ran away with your lover?" the lead lawyer asked. "No," Clara said firmly. "I ran away to save my life. Isaac Sullivan found me collapsed on his property and offered me shelter. Nothing inappropriate happened until after I had already left my husband. But you admit you are now involved with Mr. Sullivan." "I admit I fell in love with a kind, gentle man who showed me what respect looks like," Clara said. "Yes, I love Isaac, but that is not why I left Thomas. I left because I feared he would kill me." Next, Finch called Martha the cook. The older woman was clearly terrified, but she held firm in her testimony, describing bruises she had seen on Clara, screaming she had heard from the master bedroom, and one terrible incident where Jackson had thrown Clara down a flight of stairs and Martha had had to help her back to bed. Jackson's lawyers tried to discredit Martha. suggesting she had been dismissed from her position and was lying in revenge. But Martha produced her current pay stubs, proving she was still employed by Jackson, which made her testimony all the more credible since she was risking her livelihood to speak. Finally, Finch called Isaac to the stand. He described finding Clara, the condition she had been in, and the fear he had witnessed in her every day since. He kept his responses factual and unemotional, not allowing Jackson's lawyers to paint him as some opportunistic seducer. When all testimony had been heard, Judge Morrison announced he would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. It was an agonizing wait. Isaac and Clara returned to the cabin, and the days crept by with painful slowness. They tried to maintain their normal routines, but anxiety colored everything. At night, they held each other close, drawing comfort from physical nearness. "What if he rules against us?" Clara asked one night, her voice small in the darkness. "Then we appeal," Isaac said. "And if that fails, we run. We will go to California or Oregon or anywhere Jackson cannot reach us. I am not letting you go back to him, Clara, no matter what any judge says. You would do that. Give up your land, your home, everything you have built." "In a heartbeat," Isaac said without hesitation. "Land can be replaced. You cannot." 14 days after the hearing, a messenger arrived at the cabin with a letter from Finch. Isaac's hands shook as he opened it. Clara pressed against his side, both of them holding their breath. The ruling was in their favor. Judge Morrison had granted Clara's petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, citing the testimony of both Clara and Martha as credible and compelling. The marriage between Clara Jenkins and Thomas Jackson was hereby dissolved, effective immediately. Jackson was ordered to pay Clara a settlement of $500 and to have no further contact with her. Clara burst into tears, collapsing against Isaac as relief flooded through her. Isaac held her tight, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "It is over," he said. "You are free, Clara. You are finally free." They celebrated that night with a special dinner, using the last of the supplies they had been saving for a special occasion. As they ate, they talked about the future for the first time without the shadow of Jackson hanging over them. "I want to marry you," Isaac said suddenly. "Properly in a church with witnesses and everything legal and right. Will you have me, Clara Jenkins?" Clara's smile was radiant. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Petaluma, with Robert Finch and Martha the cook as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that Isaac had purchased from the dressmaker in town, and she carried wildflowers Isaac had picked that morning from the meadow near the cabin. The ceremony was short and sweet, the minister's words washing over them like a blessing. When Isaac kissed his bride, the small group of observers cheered. Even Henry Price from the general store had shown up, apparently having pieced together the truth of Catherine Sullivan's real identity and approving of how things had turned out. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held at the cabin with neighbors and new friends. Someone had brought a fiddle and there was dancing under the stars. Clara's laugh rang out clear and bright, the sound of a woman who was finally, truly happy. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the cabin that was now officially theirs together, Isaac carried Clara over the threshold. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Clara said, reaching up to cup his face. "Thank you for saving me, for believing me, for loving me." "Thank you for trusting me," Isaac replied, "for being brave enough to run, to fight, to choose a different life. You saved yourself, Clara. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed someone." They made love that night as husband and wife, their union blessed by law and witnessed by God. And in the quiet afterward, They began planning the life they would build together. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and simple pleasures. Clara proved to be an excellent partner in running the property, with a head for numbers that helped Isaac manage their finances better than he ever had alone. They expanded the cattle herd, repaired the barn, and planted a larger garden. In the spring of 1883, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of fear. Clara had worried that Jackson's violence might have damaged her ability to have children, so the pregnancy felt like a miracle. "What do you hope for?" Isaac asked one evening, his hand resting gently on Clara's still flat stomach. "A boy or a girl, healthy," Clara said immediately. "That is all I care about, though if I had to choose, maybe a boy. A little version of you, kind and strong and good." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with Clara's green eyes and Isaac's dark hair. They named him James Robert Sullivan, the middle name in honor of the lawyer who had fought for Clara's freedom. Holding his son for the first time, Isaac felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. This tiny person was half him and half Clara, a perfect blend of their love made flesh. "He is beautiful," Clara whispered from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "We made something beautiful, Isaac." "We did," Isaac agreed, carefully placing James in Clara's arms. "And we are going to give him the best life we can. A life full of love and safety and possibility." The years that followed were good ones. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved helping his father with the animals and following his mother around the garden. In 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, honoring the cook whose testimony had helped free Clara. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Samuel. Their family grew, and so did their property. Isaac proved to have a talent for cattle ranching, and within a few years, they had one of the most successful operations in the region. Clara managed the household accounts and started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in town, which brought in additional income. They were not rich, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. The children grew up knowing they were loved, and Clara made sure to teach them that cruelty was never acceptable, that strength came from kindness, not violence. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Clara would lie in Isaac's arms and marvel at how different her life had turned out from what she had imagined that terrible day when she ran from Jackson. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been mending that fence?" she asked one such night. "If I had stumbled onto someone else's property instead?" "I try not to think about it," Isaac said, tightening his arms around her. "Because the idea of you ending up anywhere but here with me is too painful to consider." "I was so scared that day," Clara remembered. "I did not know if I would survive another hour, let alone build a whole life. And then there you were, this steady, calm man who looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," Isaac said. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." News occasionally filtered back to them about Thomas Jackson. His cattle empire had suffered some setbacks, and he had remarried, though the marriage reportedly ended badly. Clara felt a pang of sympathy for the new Mrs. Jackson, whoever she was, but mostly she felt gratitude that it was no longer her problem. The settlement money Jackson had been ordered to pay never materialized. He had appealed that portion of the judgment and tied it up in legal proceedings until finally, Clara told Finch to let it go. She did not need Jackson's money. She had something far more valuable: freedom, love, and a family of her own. As the children grew older, Clara and Isaac made sure to teach them the value of helping others. When they heard of a family in town struggling after a fire destroyed their home, the Sullivans were first to offer assistance. When a neighboring rancher fell ill and could not manage his property alone, Isaac organized the community to help bring in the harvest. "Why do we help people, Mama?" Young James asked one day after they had delivered food to a widow in town. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most," Clara said, kneeling to look her son in the eye. "Your father could have turned me away, but he chose kindness instead, and that kindness changed my whole life. We help others because we know what it means to need help." The years turned, and Montana Territory became the state of Montana in 1889. Isaac and Clara celebrated with their neighbors, proud to be part of the growing West. Their oldest son, James, showed a talent for ranching and seemed likely to take over the family business eventually. Elizabeth proved to be artistic, always drawing or painting the landscape around them. Samuel was still young, but he showed signs of his mother's head for numbers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Clara with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with trusted friends and took the train west, Clara's first time seeing the ocean. "I want to find my aunt," Clara said as they stood on the deck of the ferry crossing the bay. "My mother's sister, Eleanor. I do not even know if she is still alive, but I would like to try." They found Aunt Eleanor living in a modest house in the Mission District. She was a widow in her 60s, and when she opened the door to find her niece standing there, she burst into tears. "Clara. My dear Clara, I thought I had lost you forever. Your father wrote me when he married you off to that awful man, and I sent letters, but they were all returned unopened. I thought perhaps you had died." "I nearly did," Clara said, embracing her aunt, "but I was saved. This is my husband, Isaac. We have 3 children and a ranch in Montana." They spent a week with Eleanor, sharing stories and healing old wounds. Eleanor had wanted to take Clara in after her mother died, but Clara's father had refused, wanting to keep his daughter close as a housekeeper. Learning this, Clara felt a measure of peace about her father's choices. He had been a broken man, she realized, unable to cope with his grief in any healthy way. While that did not excuse what he had done, it helped her understand it. On their last night in San Francisco, Eleanor pulled Clara aside. "You have built a good life," she said. "Your mother would be so proud of you, not just for surviving, but for having the courage to choose happiness." "I had help," Clara said, glancing at Isaac, who was examining a painting on the far wall. "I had Isaac. Love is always a choice," Eleanor said wisely. "He chose to help you, yes, but you chose to trust him to fight for your freedom, to build something new. Never forget that you saved yourself, dear girl. He was just smart enough to see your worth." Back home in Montana, life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew taller and more independent. The ranch prospered. Clara and Isaac grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year into something solid and unshakable. They faced challenges, of course. There was the hard winter of 1893, when they lost a quarter of their herd to the cold and had to rebuild. There was the year Elizabeth fell from a horse and broke her arm, and the terrifying 3 days before they knew she would recover fully. There were droughts and market downturns and all the normal struggles of frontier life. But through it all, they had each other. And that made every challenge surmountable. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Clara sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Their children were grown now. James was married with children of his own, managing the ranch alongside Isaac. Elizabeth had married a schoolteacher and moved to Helena. Samuel was studying law, inspired by the story of Robert Finch helping his mother. 25 years, Clara said, her hand in Isaac's. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stumbled onto your property, half dead and terrified, and sometimes it feels like I have been happy my entire life." "I knew that day," Isaac said. "The moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." "My mother used to say that love finds you when you need it most," Clara said. "I did not understand what she meant until I met you. I needed you, Isaac. I needed your kindness and your strength and your absolute certainty that I deserved better than what I had been given. And you gave me purpose," Isaac said. "Before you, I was just a man working land, going through motions. You made me want to be better, to build something that mattered. This family we created, this life, it is everything I never knew I wanted." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to emerge. Inside the house, they could hear James and his wife putting their grandchildren to bed, the sound of young voices protesting bedtime and adult laughter in response. "We did well," Clara said softly. "Despite everything, despite all the odds against us, we built something good." "We built something great," Isaac corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. "And it all started because you were brave enough to run, and I was lucky enough to be there when you did." "I love you, Isaac Sullivan," Clara said, turning to face him. "I have loved you since that first day, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Clara Sullivan," Isaac replied. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the absolute best thing." They kissed then. A gentle kiss full of 25 years of love and partnership and unwavering devotion. And as the Montana stars wheeled overhead, they sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, living proof that sometimes the wildest journeys lead us exactly where we belong. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, celebrations and sorrows, all the rich tapestry of a life well lived. Clara never forgot where she had come from, the fear and desperation that had driven her to run. But she also never let it define her. She was not just a woman who had escaped an abusive marriage. She was a mother, a grandmother, a successful businesswoman, a pillar of her community, and most importantly, a woman who had chosen love and been loved in return. Isaac remained her constant companion through it all, the steady presence who had first offered her shelter and then given her a home in every sense of the word. They aged together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. On a cool autumn evening in 1915, as they sat together watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard of the ranch that had grown far beyond anything they had first imagined, Clara leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" she asked. "When you asked if I wanted to go back, you said you could not go back," Isaac recalled, "and I promised you that you would never have to." "Best promise anyone ever made me," Clara said with a smile. "Best promise anyone ever kept." Isaac kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still as familiar and beloved as the day he first held her. "I would make it again," he said. "Every day for the rest of my life I would make that same promise." And he did, keeping his word to protect and love her until his final day. When Isaac passed peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 60, Clara grieved the loss of her great love but took comfort in the life they had shared. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who all bore the mark of the love story that had created their family. On her own deathbed in 1923, Clara gathered her family around her. Her son James held one hand, her daughter Elizabeth the other, while grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the room. "I want you all to remember something," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Your grandfather saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn. But more than that, he showed me what real love looks like. It looks like kindness in the face of cruelty. It looks like shelter offered without expectation. It looks like choosing each other every single day through good times and hard times. That is what I want for all of you. Find that kind of love. Be that kind of love. She closed her eyes then, and with a soft smile on her face, Clara Sullivan slipped away to join her beloved Isaac. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their entire love story. The Sullivan Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family along with the story of how it all began. The tale of the cowboy who offered shelter to a runaway, and the woman who said she could not go back, became family legend. Great-great-grandchildren would ask to hear it again and again, the story of how their family started with an act of kindness that bloomed into a love that changed everything. And on quiet Montana evenings, when the wind whispered through the valleys and the stars blazed overhead, some swore they could still see two figures sitting on that old porch, hand in hand, watching over the legacy they had created together. A legacy built not on wealth or power, but on the simple, profound truth that love, real love, can heal the deepest wounds and create miracles from the ashes of despair. The story of Isaac and Clara Sullivan lived on, a testament to courage, kindness, and the transformative power of love in the wild, beautiful, unforgiving, yet ultimately redemptive landscape of the American West.